Colombia and the countries. Now we are going to talk about the bilateral trade that exists between Colombia and the destination countries that have been analyzed through the work that has been presented. We will see this part from the point of view of Colombia, uh, how much it exports to these countries and how much it matters from them. We will also see the percentage of participation that Colombia has in the imports of these markets and that are the main product and what are the main products that it exports to them in order to analyze a little export trend in these regions. First, we will talk about Israel. Colombia imported from Israel in the year 2020 a total of $78,424 million dollars, and the exports from this country were $298,878 million dollars, and Colombia's participation in the total imports of Israel was 0.03%, and the main products was sent was solid foods, coffee, flowers, and toilet paper was the four principal products exported. Secondly, we have New Zealand, a country from which goods with a total value of $6,312 million dollars were imported in 2019, and a total of $11,697 million dollars was exported. Colombia's share in that market in imports was 0.04%, and the main products were coffee, medicines, heterocyclic compounds, and flowers. Lastly, Australia, a country from which in 2019 $25,207 million dollars were imported and $103,053 million dollars was exported. Colombia represents 0.04% of Australia's imports that same year with stellar products such as gold, coffee, flowers, fruit, and cane sugar.
Now we are going to talk about the general tariff by country. As we can see, the applied tariff and the AAV in each country have the same value. In this aspect, Israel has a giant disadvantage because despite having a FTA with Colombia, its applied tariff and its EAV are 12%, while Australia and New Zealand have rates of 5%. The import data of heading 34011100 for the three countries shows that Australia's advantage in importing this product is enormous, since it represents an import percentage higher than 1%, overhang around $57 million in 2019. Finally, an excellent advantage is that none of the three countries have special requirements for the importation of our soap, so we won't skimp on extra packaging cost for export. As we can see, any one of these countries needs a non-tariff of technical requirements of the product, so it's a great advantage.
At this point, we are going to directly analyze Colombian export to the three select countries, focusing mainly on the growth they have had over the last few years. This is important because, in addition to allowing us to observe current trends and also be able to do projections of the same in the future. In the year 2020, Colombian export to the three countries were about 460 million, of which 298 million come from Israel, 145 million from Australia, and 50 million from New Zealand. This is mainly due to the free trade agreement between Colombia and the ASEAN country, while with the Oceanic country, since there are no trade agreements, the difference occurs due to the condition of the two countries. In the following graph, we can observe graphically how the behavior of Colombian export have been. Firstly, we have Israel, where in the labor I had a peak of more than 400 million in 2018, and as of this year they have been decreasing until reaching the figure of 2020. This decrease is mainly reflected in the export of goods belonging to the chapter mineral fruits, mineral oils, mineral wax, which from 2019 to 2020 present a drop of 50 million, and more represent in the enter 22% drop from 2019 to 2020. This indicates that it's not that the trade from Colombia to Israel is falling at the general level, but that is in a specific type of product, and that this has not been because Israel has stopped buying signed, they have maintained the reserves at 12.7 million during that period. As from New Zealand, as we can in the graph, the behavior have been more stable. It had a growth in 2030 where it went from 11 million to 50 million stable. And the main export products of this country are coffee with 44% of the other exports and products of animal origin with 26%. Australia have been the most interesting side. It's the only that has present a growth of 56 million in 2019 to 145 million in 2020, mainly in periods where there is no presence of fuels and products of plant origin dominating for consumptions, decoration or personal use. For this reason, it is considered that taking into account the aforementioned variables, Australia will be the best option to carry out the export process of our product. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Daniel Preciado, and then I come to talk about two very important variables that we use to determine the destination countries that we are going to export our soap. One of the variables we use that the doing business, which is responsible for providing all the objective measurements of the started that regulate all business activity in the country in which 119 countries are located, which are measurements in a ranking provided by the doing business to determine the position of each country. This project started in the 2002 and its first report was published in the 2003, in which over the years it has sought to improve and perfect all the measurements. These measurements are taken from the main city of each country depending on the size of this population. In the countries has too many people, the project evaluates the two main cities. The objective of doing business is to provide countries with a measurements and analysis to promote healthy competition that provide information on the economy and who it provide the opportunity to open business with each countries. So the idea is that as each report countries will improve their ranking signs, the report can recognize the weaknesses that each one has. The main points on which the doing business is based to determine this ranking are, for example, starting a business, dealing with countries permits, getting electricity, restricting property, getting credit, projecting minority investor, paying taxes, trading across borders, enforcing contracts, resolving insolvency. To begin, the first country in our analysis was Israel, which ranks 35 in the total out of 119. In the following measurements that I am going to tell you, each one is the position in which is located in each measurement after its respective analysis, with a classification 76.7 overall. For example, in the start of business is position 28, in the trading across border 67, in a resolving insolvency is 29. For our analysis is the country which could be exported, also there will be some difficulties based on the previous point. The next country chosen with New Zealand, which ranked number 1 out of the 119 countries, thanks to its easy of opening and trading in that countries, with a global ranking of 86.2. For example, in starting a business is a 1 position in the total ranking. In getting credit is a 1 position. In paying taxes is a 9 position. In resolving insolvency is a 36 position. As we can see, it occupies the first places is the total ranking, but in each of the measurements is not among the first. It is also the countries which the best beneficity to carries out negotiation around the work. An excellent option, the export or business. And finally, we have Australia, who occupies the 14 places in the total ranking with a score of 81.2. For example, in the different starting business is a 7 position in the total, and getting credit is a 4 position. In resolving insolvency resolving solvents is at 20 position. Australia, by comparison, has some better measurements than New Zealand, but it is not better. For our analysis, it's a good option to negotiate and start the export of our product. Logistical profile. LPI Logistic Performance Index tool which seeks to compare and identify the advantage and disadvantage that countries have in the entire logistic area, in which there is a record of 116 countries, which with this performance can evaluate and improve their competitive with respect on the other countries. The indices by which this performance is governed are 1. Infrastructure, 2. Logistic competence, 3. Rating and tracking, 4. Border management, custom and export and import process, and 5. Time association with the flow of material and or goods. The first country that we will see will be Israel, which is ranked 37 in the global ranking. It has maritime access, which the 4 ports. The largest is in Haifa. From Colombia, between the Atlantic and Buenaventura, they have approximately 26 routes and an average of 23 to 29 days off. In Israel has 47 airstrips, and there are currently 10 airlines bound for Israel from Colombia. This is, for example, different airlines. And New Zealand, the next country. New Zealand occupies the 15th places in the global ranking in maritime access. Between the Atlantic and Buenaventura, there are 14 shipping companies, which the average trip is between 19 and 23 days, some which the work can take a few more days. This is access. And on the air service, there are 4 airlines that carry out the cargo transported service to New Zealand. And then the Finnish country is Australia. It's ranked number 18 in the global logistic ranking. It has maritime access. He has 15 ports. At the moment, there are 13 shipping companies between direct and transshipment. The average trip is between 22 and 25 days. In the air part, this is the access. In the air part, it has 40-65 runways. There are currently 6 airlines that carry out cargo transport from Colombia to Australia. The best destination for the shipment of merchandising from Colombia can be said to be Australia, due to the time and variety of transportation possibility.
We are talking about the variable of constant risks. It is understood that this variable takes into account other variables for their qualification. So a brief summary of the rest of the variables is made to give us an overview of stability when evaluating the business environment when investing in different countries. In global ranking, the 3 countries correspond to good position at the global level, especially what is New Zealand and Australia. In addition to the country risk rating, it takes into account factors such as GDP growth, annual inflation, the budget balance, the bid balance current, and finally the public education. That it also has the same factors are used for the qualification of the business climate, where the country risk factor is also qualified. Israel, the first. Israel has shown both economic and social growth in recent years. Making alliances with nearby countries is allowing its own supply, such as more economical energy that you prove from other countries, as well as in areas of family, chemistry, and security, which helped for a prompt vaccination and progressive recovery for COVID-19. It must be taken into account that these alliances made by Israel are strategies for economic recovery, despite the global fall due to the pandemic. Israel uh, Israel has been considered economically stable, but when the business climate is good but not excellent, it should be considered that its geographical location is strategic, so its foreign investment and support is good, but the conflict with its surroundings are factors that do not favor the country when conducting business, but taking into account its economic and social factors in terms of life are feasible. Um, the next country is New Zealand, that due to the strict measures that have been taken on COVID-19 has reflected a drop in GDP for 2020. So the forces are brought for economic recovery as New Zealand has its strengths in exports, especially in dairy and meat for China, to remain stable in its economy and affected sectors basis of its economy such as tourism. It is expected that by 2021 it will have its recovery signs. It represents 15% of the national GDP. In addition, New Zealand has a low public debt, so it is not exempt from growth in this variable in the GDP, but this growth is not great. Now, then, taking into account difficulties and opportunities that it presents, it can be said that it's in a growth boom in its economy, being affected, also taking in account that it is a country that depends a lot of foreign investing, so that important is feasible. Also in the country risk rating in considered good, and the business climate is excellent in this country because currently it is a flexible country for negotiations and presenting good economic figures. Next is Australia. Australia has very attractive outlook for foreign companies and investors. They are reaching a record in terms of their fiscal deficit and its reduction in expected, where they cover the tax reflect for the lower and middle class. It must be understood that the deficit of 8% of its GDP, which is very low. It is considerable that it has a easy of employment as well as a lifestyle. So its migration for foreigners is high, thus giving a productivity benefit in its economy. It should be taken into account. The tourist sector is very popular, especially by foreigners. The business environment is viable and feasible because its rating is A1, being excellent for getting inversion when it comes to investing. For this reason, Australia is the country with the greatest festival when it comes to doing business and with a low country risk, thus demonstrating great potential. Since the three nations are in optimal growth, they have good economic growth and very good for getting investment, especially with its New Zealand and Australian that they competent in terms of effectiveness, but based on data and environments. Australia has great confidence, better indications, and a better outlook for its investment.
In a global score, Australia turned out to the best country of the three. All this thanks to the fact that it stood out in sectors such as the growth of Colombian exports to this country, general tariff, doing business, and because it is a country with low political risk, what will guarantee an efficient and effective export to this country. New Zealand is our second choice thanks to its overall score. For its part, Israel is the last on the list. Despite having FTA with Colombia, the fact that it did not affect in any way the tariff item that we will export was weighed down. Also, a high political risk and having the highest tariff condition affected their score.